Niggle slipped out of the main door and blinked a little. The sun was very bright. Also, he'd expected to walk out into a large town to match the size of the station, but he didn't. He was on the top of a hill, green, bare, swept by a keen, invigorating wind. Nobody else about. Away down in the hill he could see the roof of the station shining. He walked downhill to the station briskly, but without hurry. The porter spotted him at once. "This way," he said, and led Niggle to a bay, in which there was a very pleasant little local train standing. One coach, small engine, but very bright, clean, and newly painted. It looked as if this was their first run. Even the track lay in front of the engine looked new. The rails shone. Chairs were painted green. Sleepers gave off a delicious smell of fresh tar in the warm sunshine. The coach was empty. "Where does this train go, porter?" asked Niggle. "I don't think they've fixed its name yet," said the porter, "but you'll find it all right." He shut the door. The train moved off at once. Niggle lay back in his seat. The little engine puffed along in a deep cutting with high green banks roofed with blue sky. It didn't seem very long before the engine got a whistle. The brakes were put on and the train stopped. There was no station or signboard, only a flight of steps up to the green embankment. At the top of the steps there was a wicket gate in a trim hedge. By the gate stood his bicycle. At least it looked like his. There was a yellow label tied to its bars with "Niggle" written on it in black letters. Niggle pushed open the gate, jumped on the bicycle, and went bowling downhill in the spring sunshine. Before long he found that the path on which he had started had disappeared. The bicycle was rolling along over marvellous turf. It was green and close, and yet he could see every blade distinctly. He seemed to have remembered having seen or dreamt of that sweep of grass somewhere or other. The curves of the land were familiar somehow. Yes, the ground was becoming level, as it should, and now, of course, it was beginning to rise again. A green shadow came between him and the sun. Niggle looked up and fell off his bicycle. Before him stood the tree. His tree. Finished. If you could say that of a tree that was alive, its leaves opening, its branches growing and bending in the wind that Niggle had so often felt or guessed, and had so often failed to catch. He gazed at the tree. Slowly he lifted his arms and opened them wide. "It's a gift," he said. He was referring to his art, and also to the result, but he was using the word quite literally. He went on looking at the tree. All the leaves he had ever laboured at were there, as he had imagined, rather than as he had made them. And these were others that only budded in his mind, and many that might have budded if he'd only had time. Nothing was written on them, just an exquisite leaves. Yet they were dated as clear as a calendar. Some of the most beautiful and most characteristic, most perfect examples of the Niggle style. Even seemed to have produced in collaboration with Mr. Parrish. There was no other way of putting it. The birds were building in the tree, astonishing birds, how they sang. They were mating, hatching, growing wings, flying away, singing in the forest. Even while he looked at them, now he saw that the forest was there too, opening out onto either side and marching away in the distance. The mountains were glimmering far away. After a time, Niggle turned towards the forest, not because he was tired of the tree, but he seemed to have got it all clear in his mind now, and was aware of it, and of its growth, even when he was not looking at it. As he looked away, he discovered an odd thing. The forest, of course, was a distant forest, but he could approach it, even enter it, without its losing that particular charm. Yet he had not before been able to walk into the distance without turning it into mere surroundings. It really added a considerable attraction to walking in the country, because as you walked, new distances opened. so that you now had double, treble and quadruple distances. Doubly, trebly and quadruply enchanting. You could go on and have a whole country in a garden, or in a picture, if you prefer to call it that. You could go on and on, not perhaps forever. There were the mountains in the background. Did they get nearer, very slowly? They didn't seem to belong to the picture, or only as linked to something else, a glimpse through the trees of something different, a further stage, another picture. Niggle walked about. He was not merely pottering, he was looking around carefully. The tree was finished, though not finished with. Just the other way about was what it used to be, he thought. But in the forest there was a number of inconclusive regions that still needed work and thought. Nothing needed acting not any longer. Nothing was altering any longer. Nothing was wrong as far as it had gone, but it needed continuing up to a definite point. Niggle saw the point precisely in each case. He sat down under a very beautiful distant tree, a variation of the great tree, but quite individual. It would have been a little more attention. It would have been with a little more attention. He considered where to begin work and where to end, and how much time was required. He could not quite work out his scheme. Of course, he said, what I need is parish. There are lots of things about earth and plants and trees that he knows and I don't. This place cannot be left just as my private park. I need help and advice. I ought to have got it sooner. He got up and walked to the place where he had decided to begin work. He took off his coat, then down in a little sheltered hollow, hidden from further view, he saw a man, looking round rather bewildered. He was leaning on a spade. Plainly didn't know what to do. Niggle hailed him. "Parish!" he called. Parish shouldered his spade and came up to him. He still limped a little. They didn't speak, just nodded as they used to, passing in a lane, but now they walked about together, arm in arm, without talking. Niggle and Parish agreed exactly where to make the small house and garden seemed to be required. As they worked together, it became plain that Niggle was now the better of the two at ordering the time, getting things done. Oddly enough, it was Niggle who became most absorbed in building and gardening, whilst Parish often wondered about looking at trees, and especially at the tree. One day Niggle was busy planting a quickset hedge, and Parish was lying on the grass nearby, looking attentively at a beautiful, shapely little yellow flower growing in the green turf. Niggle had to put a lot of them among the roots of his tree long ago. Suddenly Parish looked up. His face was glistening in the sun, and he was smiling. "This is grand," he said. "I oughtn't to be here, really. Thank you for putting in a word for me." "Nonsense," said Niggle. "I don't remember what I said, but anyway, it wasn't nearly enough." "Oh, yes, it was," said Parish. "It got me out a lot sooner. That second voice, you know. He had me sent here. He said you had asked to see me. I owe it to you." "No, you owe it to the second voice," said Niggle. "We both do." They went on living and working together. I don't know how long. It's no use denying that at first they occasionally disagreed, especially if they got tired. For at first they didn't sometimes get tired. They found that they were both provided with tonics. Each bottle had the same label, a few drops of this taken in water from the spring before resting. They found the spring in the heart of the forest. Only once long ago had Niggle imagined it. He had never drawn it. Now he perceived that it was the source of the lake that glimmered far away, and the nourishment of that dew that grew in the country. The few drops made the water astringent, rather bitter, but invigorating, and it cleared the head. After drinking, they rested alone, and then they got up again, and things went on merrily. At such times Niggle would think of wonderful new flowers and plants, and Parish always knew exactly how to set them and where they would do best. Long before the tonics were finished, they'd ceased to need them. Parrish lost his limp. As the work grew to an end, they allowed themselves more and more time for walking about, looking at the trees and the flowers and the lights and the shapes and the lie of the land. Sometimes they sang together, but Niggle found that he was beginning to turn his eyes more and more towards the mountains. The time came when the house in the hollow, the garden and the grass, the forest and the lake and all the country was nearly complete in its own proper fashion. The great tree was in full blossom. "We shall finish this evening," said Parrish one day. "After that we'll go for a really long walk." They set out next day, and they walked until they came right through the distances to the edge. It wasn't visible, of course. There was no line or fence or wall. But they knew they had come to the margin of that country. They saw a man. He looked like a shepherd. He was walking towards them, down the grass slopes that led to the mountains. "Do you want a guide?" he asked. "Do you want to go on?" For a moment a shadow fell between Niggle and Parrish. Niggle knew that he did want to go on, and in a sense ought to go on, but Parrish did not want to go on, was not ready to go. "I must wait for my wife," said Parrish to Niggle. "She'd be lonely. I'd rather gather that they would send her after me some time or other when she was ready, and when I got things ready for her. The house is finished now, as well it may be, but I should like to show it to her. She'll be able to make it better, I expect, more homely. Hope she'll like this country too." He turned to the shepherd. "Are you a guide?" he asked. "Could you tell me the name of this country?" "Don't you know?" "It's Niggle's country. It's Niggle's picture, most of it. A little of it is now Parrish's garden." "Niggle's picture," said Parrish in astonishment. "Did you think of all this, Niggle? I never knew you were so clever. Why didn't you tell me?" "He tried to tell you long ago," said the man, "but you wouldn't look. He had only got canvas and paint in those days, and you wanted to mend your roof with them. But this is what you and your wife used to call Niggle's nonsense, or that daubing." "But it didn't look like this then. Not real," said Parrish. "No, only a glimpse then," said the man. "But you might have caught the glimpse if you'd ever thought it worthwhile to try." "I didn't give you much chance," said Niggle. "I never tried to explain. I used to call you Old Earth Grubber. But what does it matter? We've lived and worked together now. Things might have been different, but they couldn't have been better. All the same, I'm afraid I shall have to be going on. We shall meet again, I expect. There must be many more things we can do together. Goodbye." He shook Parrish's hand warmly, a good, firm, honest hand it seemed. He turned and looked back for a moment at the blossom of the great tree, shining like flame, and the birds were flying in the air and singing. Then he smiled and nodded to Parrish and went off with the shepherd. He was going to learn about sheep and the high pastures, and look at the wider sky, and walk even further towards the mountains, always uphill. Beyond that, I cannot guess what became of him. Even little Niggle in his own old home couldn't glimpse the mountains far away. When they got into the border of his picture, what were they really like, and what lies behind them, beyond them? Only those can say who have climbed them. "I think he's a silly little man," said the councillor, Tomkis. "Worthless, in fact. No use to society at all." "Oh, I don't know," said Atkins, who was nobody of importance, just a schoolmaster. "I'm not so sure. Depends on what you mean by use.
No practical or economic use, said Tomkins. I dare say he could have been made into a serviceable cog of some sort if schoolmasters knew their business, but you don't. So you get useless people of this sort. If I ran this country, I should put him and his like to some job that they're fit for. Washing dishes in a communal kitchen or something. I should see that they did it properly, or I'd put them away. I should have them put away long ago. Him put away long ago. Put him away? You mean you'd have made him start on the journey before his time? Yes, if you must use that meaningless old expression. Push him through the tunnel into the great rubbish heap. That's what I mean. And you don't think painting is worth anything? Not worth preserving or improving or even making use of? Of course painting has its uses, said Tomkins, but you couldn't make use of his painting. There are plenty of scope for bold young men, not afraid of new ideas and new methods, none of this old-fashioned stuff, private daydreaming. He couldn't have designed a telling poster to save his life. Always fiddling with leaves and flowers. I asked him why once. He said he thought they were pretty. Can you believe it? He said pretty. What digestive and genital organs of plants? I said to him. He had nothing to answer. Silly footler. Footler? Sighed Atkins. Very poor little man. He never finished anything. Oh well. His canvas has been put to better uses since then. Since he went. But I'm not so sure, Tomkins. You remember that large one, the one that used to patch the damaged house next door to his after the gales and floods? I found a corner of it torn off, lying in a field. It was damaged but legible. A mountain peak and a spray of leaves. Can't get it out of my mind. Out of your what? Said Tomkins. What are you two talking about? Said Perkins, intervening in the cause of peace. Atkins had flushed rather red. The name's not worth repeating, said Tomkins. I don't know why we were talking about him at all. You didn't live in the town? No, said Atkins. But you had your eye on his house all the same. That's why you used to go and call, sneer at him whilst drinking his tea. Well, you've got his house now, as well as the one in town, so you need not grudge him his name. We were talking about Niggle, if you want to know, Perkins. Oh, poor little Niggle, said Perkins. Never knew he painted. That was probably the last time Niggle's name ever came up in conversation. However, Atkins preserved the odd corner. Most of it crumbled, but one beautiful leaf remained intact. Atkins had it framed. Later he left it to the town museum. A long while. Leaf by Niggle hung there in the recess. It was noticed by a few eyes, but eventually the museum was burnt down, and the leaf and Niggle were entirely forgotten in his old country. It's proving very useful indeed, said the second voice, as a holiday and a refreshment. It's splendid for a convalescence, and not only that, for many it is the best introduction to the mountains. It works wonders in some cases. I'm sending more and more there. They seldom have to come back. No, that is so, said the first voice. I think we shall have to give the region a name. What do you propose? The porter settled that some time ago, said the second voice. Trained for Niggle's parish in the bay. He's shouted that for a long while now. Niggle's parish. I sent a message to them both to tell them. What did they say? They both laughed. Laughed, the mountains rang with it.